If you're just getting started in game development, there's a thing that I have to explain to you. And it's so urgent that even though my whole usual setup is all box stepper and chucks because I'm moving in 5 days, I couldn't wait to get this video out. It's a pattern I've seen for many, many, many years. And basically I want to help make sure you're aware of it so it doesn't catch you too off guard. And this is one of the challenges of doing this, is like I'm going to explain, no matter how much someone says this, it's still really hard to account for anyway. It's just inherent. It's the nature of the process. But I think knowing that can help you navigate it. Even if you've got nothing to do with me, my services, my approaches, my materials, whatever, it's going to help you out. So what winds up happening is when you're trying to get started, everyone's always telling you, scope down, make your game smaller, you're making your thing too big, do a smaller thing, etc. And no matter how much people say this, it turns out truly no matter how much. I spent at least a decade trying to bang that drum, and lots of other folks have come out there and done panels about it, talks, whatever. What winds up happening is what people think is small still isn't small enough. And they're like, oh, I'll make only an hour-long experience. I'll make something that's only 10 or 15 rooms. I'll just have, I don't know, 5 or 10 cars. How hard could that be in this kind of game? And what winds up happening is there's all these other complications that aren't anticipated because they're different than the question of can you picture how to do those tasks. They're different than can you come up with design answers to the decisions to be made that have to just do with the reality of production and complications and scale and things that work in a 48-hour game jam time period just do not unfold the same way in a several-month, longer, bigger project involving multiple people, even if it's solo, does not pan out the way we think. And so what winds up happening is that either people release on time, and of course in Home Team, just as the example that I'm most familiar with from the 8 years I've been running this group, every single game out of 180 we've releases on time. And people's first projects, quite often they feel like I overshot this, right? Like I should have planned a little differently. It just didn't really feel like it came together as well as I hoped. And I think part of what my role there is explaining to people is it's helping them understand like this is an unavoidable experience. This is a part of the journey. There's nothing anyone, including me, having done this for so many years, can tell anybody to prevent them from overshooting it a bit. And part of the challenge that's going on is that if you could face up front the actualities of the realities of production and the trade-offs involved and how life is going to keep happening outside of it, so on. In many cases, unfortunately, we wouldn't have enough oomph to give ourselves that push over the threshold of momentum it's going to take to kick something off for real, to really do a real thing. But then when we release it, again, if we're not aware that this is just part of the process, part of the learning journey, and that there's no shortcut to the other side of it, but through it, but firsthand personal experience, having done it to show ourselves where and how those lines are and the complexities that relate to why they are the way they are. Well, if we're not aware of this, it can be really demoralizing. And so it's part of why there's a whole bunch of people out there who they'll try to make one game and either it comes out and they feel demotivated and discouraged, and so they stop doing it, despite the fact that their experience having been through that is what's going to make them a better lead, a better project designer, a better developer on the next project if they stick with it, right? It's worth it. It's not in vain only if you stick with it. If you don't stick with it, then, that's how you left it, right? 0-1 on the defeated side, even by your own assessment, your own feeling. So it's also realizing, again, it's not defeat. That's what it looks like at that scale. It's a bit like if someone was new to playing guitar or new to writing a story, and their first guitar song that they write themselves, they kind of cringe about. And they're like, well, I should have written a better song. And sure, but the way through that is to get it out of your system, doing what makes sense to you at your level from what you know, and not to compare yourself against people who've been doing it for a lot of years, who've been on the other side of that for a long time. In fact, on the side of several of those. And each thing that we're doing, we're learning new things to internalize that improve the stuff we can do after. And so it's a necessary part of the process. Part of what we try to do in Home Team is to make that process, and again, I know you may not ever join us in Home Team Game Dev, but if you do, part of why it's built the way that it is to try to make that process easier to survive, because at the very least, you're not alone in it. And it's kind of motivating to have other people are contributing music and sound effects and art, and you wake up and there's new features working, and that can kind of help keep our morale going through it. Part of it is that we prevent, because we release on time all of our projects, we prevent the other bad outcome that happens for new developers doing this is, what they say, okay, I'm going to release this game in October. Come October, they realize, oh shoot, I overscoped this, I planned this in a way that it's just not going to come together the way I wanted, so I'll just give it a little more time. And that little more time turns it not just to be October, but not just October of next year, but literally years of their life. Because the reasons why it's taking so long, and again, it's hard to see till you zoom out, till like me, you've seen 500 projects made through methodologies that work for people. you just kind of keep fooling yourself, being like, well, I'm just a few more weeks away. I can see the plan, this summer at latest, this winter at latest. And it just drags out. And what would help their learning far more is to have released when they said they were going to release. That's why we do it that way in Home Team. So that then they are free to take on the next thing, which at a deeper level in terms of the design specification, the scope, the scale, the plans, the approach, it's more than just dial back the plans you have. It's slightly different plans about how to use the same energy and time in a way that's going to get a better result to show from it. In a way that once the foundations have been laid, once the directions have been aligned, once the plans have been set, there is no way to add more time, energy, and code to that besides starting over the whole thing, which, again, you're back to that same mistake of that's an even worse morale hit. And instead, you got to put a bow on it, ship it, move on with your life. Releasing on time, that is part of that learning experience. Every now and then it's rare, but every now and then I train people on how to finish projects. It's part of CompleteEveryProject.com, my new video course. I'm proud to say a bestseller on Udemy. Got to give it that plug. It's also available to rent on Gumroad. It's out there. But one of the things that some people have criticized our Home Team stuff is they'll be like, I've seen a couple of Home Team projects. They say they're released, but I've seen one or two that seem a little kind of rough around the edges. And I'm like, absolutely. Absolutely. This is a part of how those people are working through the issues that they are here to learn. They come to Home Team because they're working on this. They had never released a project before. Now they have. And at the level of it was their very first pitch, it came together. It had the core mechanics. It had a number of maybe impressive art, audio assets. It had teammates who collaborated, who constructively got things added to the portfolio they want to get out of it. It has a menu. It's got credits. It comes together. There's technically a story there of some form. And is it a compromise of what the vision was they had that they started with? Absolutely. And this is also true for commercial projects. This is true for, I just played The Firmament by the Myst team, or what remains in the current version of the Myst team, Cyan Worlds, 30 years after the years of Myst. And I really enjoyed it. I liked it a lot. But some other players had the criticism that to them it felt like, it kind of should have been bigger, should have been better, should have been more grand somehow. It was only 3 worlds, should have been 20. Well, that team is experienced enough to know that if it had been 20, it would have been worse. There's always these trade-offs. Always these trade-offs at any scale, including big, legitimate companies with a real track record, with a strong pedigree. I've used this example before, but when Grand Theft Auto 5, Grand Theft Auto 6, whatever it is now, is about to happen, when they spend $700 million on a game, that same team, I guarantee, are like, if we only had an extra $100 million, then we could achieve what we had in mind. And no, that's going to expand to 900 to $1 billion, just out of all proportion to this is what we decided this is worth it to us. And even if you're not on a budget, even if you're doing a freeware thing on your own time and energy, you still have a finite runway of your attention and morale and interest in this project. And if you don't get it released before that runs out, it only gets harder. It only gets harder as more time drags out. And suddenly you feel a need to justify, well, dang, what I was doing seemed like it would be worth spending 3 months of my life on, but it's been 6 months, it's been 9 months, it's been 12 months, it's been 2 years. And we suddenly put all this pressure on ourselves to not just justify a 3-month expenditure of our time, but to find something that, until it now justifies 2 years of time, I can't release it yet. I'm embarrassing myself. I feel like I wasted those 2 years. And this is the trap we try to help people avoid. But again, it's part of that learning experience is to confront the difficult reality that the first time you're releasing a project, part of my role is to help give people context of people at their level. So they're not comparing themselves to Steam and funded developers and people who have publisher connections, but they're comparing themselves to other people who at their experience level, their time commit, their realities, and most of them have just a few hours a week to chip in at this stuff. And when they see the reality of what they were able to do in a few months, again, there can be a little bit of morality. We try to make that as stable, survivable, sustainable, recoverable as possible in Home Team. Unlike some folks who, when they burn through a whole bunch of years of life savings, paying for art assets and music and stuff, hit the same reality. Releasing them on Steam doesn't find any sort of audience. That's a different kind of struggle. And now, because that was their approach, they can't even afford to do a project 2 or 3. They call it quits forever. I hate seeing that, right? I want people to be lifelong game developers. That's what I do. That's what I train a bunch of other people in the mentality of whether or not some years it's a career, some years it isn't. You can keep making games because you also know how to do it, even if you've got other things going on in your life. But I'm able to help people compare across, okay, well, other people in your circumstances, relative to them, you've actually had a really successful outcome for a first project you led and pitched, right? We've seen a range of things. That's also part of my approach as a trainer is I'm not really putting a high bar for filtering people to say, I only want, you got to qualify, right? A lot of schools, you apply to it. They're trying to measure you up like a company. And they're saying, well, unless you're already impressive, we're not going to accept you. And I don't know, to me, I think back, I had a sports coach in high school that I liked his mentality of, the way a bunch of college teams succeed is they won't even let you on unless you're already great. Then they just take credit for how great you are. And I'm not saying that's the only thing going on in schools. There's great knowledge being passed on in schools, but I'm saying that that is certainly an element of a whole bunch of people who got into a great program for their field probably would have done great stuff even if they never got into the program. Whereas I'm a believer that if you're a 7 out of 10, I'll help you get to a 9. If you're a 5, I'll help you get to a 7. If you're a 1, I'll help you get to a 3. Wherever you're at, my job as an educator is to help move you forward in your journey towards what's next for you, what's within your range. So it's also, again, we've got people who are pitching that in a studio environment would not have been entrusted to be a project lead. That's not how this works. You're not getting selected for seniority. You're not getting promoted. You don't have to prove yourself to anybody. When and if you want that production experience, have I figured out exactly firsthand what does and doesn't happen at my time availability, at my scale, in a way comparable to other people who have similar constraints to me in life, with 3, 4, 5, 6 months of my whatever time I can manage on the side, whatever energy I can muster on the side, whatever I can do at my energy and time level and all that. That's what we help people do in Home Team Game Dev. And again, whether or not you decide to join us in our approach, which I would love it if you do, right? The whole reason I do this is because I love doing this. I love working with people on these challenges. I've become a specialist most of my adult career, helping people with these kind of issues. Even if you don't do it with us, these points still apply. If what you're doing is you're going to Udemy and you're watching YouTube videos and you're self-teaching and maybe you're in engines and platforms and things we don't even do in Home Team, whatever. The point still applies. Your first project, to brace yourself a little bit that, did it fall short of what you had in mind? Inevitably, right? We were doing these things because we aspire to be great at them, because they matter to us, because we care about them, because we're fans of this kind of work, and that means a lot to us. But then to pick yourself up from the realization that there's no way forward but through it, that the only way to internalize this is to get that experience. And again, like I said earlier, the only way that experience pays off is if you don't give up after that. If that happens and you see, okay, well, Chris told me, I remember Chris told me this is just part of that journey. It happens to everybody, no matter what's told to them. This is just part of that experience. And now by taking that knowledge and moving forward and applying to the next project, I'm going to be able to do better than that previous one. That's all we can ever do, right? Keep moving ourselves forward. If you're not working with me, then you got to move yourself from a 1 to a 3 to a 5 to a 7 to a 7 to a 9, but not be too hard on yourself if you don't get from 1 to a 9, if you don't get from 3 to a 7. Just moving forward from where you were, and that's going to happen when you pick yourself back up, keep a good attitude about it, realize you learn what you can from it, and again, also more importantly, maybe released when you said you were going to release, which, one more plug, CompleteEveryProject.com is obviously my video course for how to do that. And these things, right, it's not just me trying to sell my stuff. I do these things because I've helped a lot of people doing it, and I want to help you as well. I've also figured out a long time ago that when I just put a bunch of information free on the internet, nobody did it. And so it's got to be connected to some other kind of machinery that can help me sustain doing it, updating it, delivering it, connecting it to other next steps and all that. Anyway, you got the gist. You got the message today. See you around. I hope you keep making games, or whatever the thing you're learning is, right? The same idea applies outside of game development. Absolutely. Applies to music making, applies to story writing, applies to any kind of practical skill you want to do in your life. This is an important note to expect. To weather a little bit of looking at your first release and kind of saying, is that the best I'm capable of? It's not. It was an important step towards what you're capable of, but that's going to happen later. Probably not your first project. How sad would life be if the best project you ever did was the first game you released? That's no good. Anyway, again, apologize for my setup. I'm living out of a suitcase right now for 5 more days. Catch all around. Maybe my next video will be at a better location with my setup, curtain, and all that back. Have a good one. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep learning stuff. Thanks for being here. Bye for now.